The United Nations says that 1,400 Palestinians have now been killed while trying to get food since May, including at least 859 near aid sites run by the so-called Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. The GHF is run in partnership between Israel and the United States and was created to circumvent the established aid groups with demonstrably disastrous results. Well, former US Special Forces Green Beret Anthony Aguilar worked as a guard at a GHF site. He's given several interviews over the past week to blow the whistle on what he says are Israeli war crimes. Joonathán will join us shortly to give the Israeli perspective on the aid scandal and to respond to what Anthony Aguilar tells me. But first of all, Mr. Aguilar, thank you very much for joining me on Uncensored. First of all, as you know, since you began speaking out, there's been a sustained campaign to discredit you. People saying that you were fired, you're a disgruntled ex-employee, you're making this up for self-interest and so on. What is your response to that, first of all?
When I decided to go on the record, I fully anticipated the discrediting and the smearing. To me, that further demonstrates that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation can't address the substantial facts, and they'd rather discredit me. Thus far, everything that has been put out about me is incorrect. I was not fired by UG Solutions, the subcontract that I worked for. I resigned my contract in very clear terms. And in fact, the UG Solutions, in providing a written letter to me on the 26th of June upon my departure from Israel, asked me to work for them again, of which I have refused. Our values do not align. I will not work for them again. But I can assure the world that not only is there my word for it, there's also video and pictures that corroborate what I have to say. So my testimony is credible, and so is my character.
Let's get to your testimony. In your estimation, what were the most damning things that you witnessed?
Well, in accordance with international humanitarian law, protocols of the Geneva Convention, of which the United States and Israel are both signatory to. In fact, Israel was one of the newest nations to sign on to the Geneva Convention protocols in the 1950s. Without question, there are violations of international humanitarian law and Geneva Convention and the protocols of which the United States and Israel both abide by. I'll start by saying where the secure distribution sites, they call them SDS, sites that I worked at. And I didn't just work on one or had experience on just one of them. I worked at all four. I also was with the IDF when we conducted a reconnaissance of all four sites before we started operations. The secure distribution sites are built deliberately, have been built and established in the operational combat area of Operations Gideon's Chariots, which ended a couple days ago in terms of the named operation. But throughout the duration of distribution, in a named ongoing offensive combat operation, 3 of the 4 sites were established in the active combat area to put civilians at risk and not safeguard their travel and their movement to areas to receive aid, whether it be water, clothing, medicine, is a war crime. To put them in that situation, to put them in that deliberate danger, is a war crime. To then fire at the crowds using live munitions, machine gun fire, rifle fire, mortar fire, to communicate with the crowd. And the IDF have said this on the record. Many IDF have said it. IDF witnesses to testimony in Gaza have said it, that they use shooting to communicate with the Palestinians. Targeting of civilians with lethal munitions for the purpose of moving or controlling their movement is a war crime. These claims that I make aren't my opinion. They are verbatim out of the conventions of the Geneva Protocol and international humanitarian law that we should all respect and abide by, regardless of the justification of the war. I am not anti-Israeli. I am not anti-Semitic. I fully support that Israel has a right to defend itself. But we also have an obligation to abide by international humanitarian law, the protocols of the Geneva Convention, and human dignity, regardless of the justification of a war.
The fact that we've had nearly 1,200 people now killed in or around these aid sites in the last few weeks, every single time there is a report of dozens of people being killed, Palestinian people being killed, the IDF releases a series of statements which are either, we're launching an investigation, we're setting up an inquiry, we're looking into this, we were firing warning shots. But I think with one or two very small exceptions, they have refused to accept any responsibility for actually killing any of those people. From what you witnessed and from what you've heard from the ground, how many of those 1,200 do you think are more likely to have been killed by IDF than by Hamas?
In and around the secure distribution sites themselves, no one has been killed. Well, let me correct that. I don't want to be absolute. Very few, I would assert, have been killed by Hamas. The entire area to the south of the Morag corridor, where all three of the distribution sites are, and I would like everybody to know, there were 4. There are now only 3. So under the UN methodology of 400 sites, there are now only 3 that the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation runs. All 3 of those sites are south of the Morag corridor. The Morag corridor in the south in Rafah is controlled by the IDF. All movement to the south of the Morag corridor is controlled by the IDF. There's an active combat operation going on in that area. These civilians that are going to these sites, these unarmed civilians, they're not armed, they're not violent, they're not being killed by Hamas. They're being killed by the indiscriminate shooting of either warning shots or, in the worst case scenario, potentially deliberately. That's not for me to investigate. I also think that the IDF should not be conducting their own investigations. I think that that completely takes away the unbiasedness of an investigation, that other entities should investigate these instances, which would require other agencies being allowed into Gaza, into the area to actually put eyes on. If the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation can bring Fox News and bring Ambassador Huckabee to a site, why can't we have international press and why can't we have investigators go in and take a look?
Yeah, I completely agree. I think it's ridiculous that they keep banning foreign media, and I think going in embedded with the IDF in a very controlled manner. And Bill Hemmer's a brilliant journalist at Fox News, but even he was stressed very clearly that he was operating in a very restricted environment, which was dictated to by the IDF in terms of where he could go. Let me bring in Joonathán Conricus. You're going to stay with us. Joonathán, your response to what you just heard.
Yes, hello, Piers. Just to begin, I hope I will be given the same latitude to speak as the previous guest. There were no interruptions and no cross-reference and no really tough questions, and I hope you will lend me the same level of attention here. What I would like to say is that
sure,
I really hope Mr. or Lieutenant Colonel in Reserves Aguilar will enjoy his 15 minutes of caressing global media attention. I think what he's doing is tremendously dishonest. I think there are multiple cases of evidence, sworn statements by his colleagues from the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation that claim that he is not only not truthful, but in fact lying, fabricating, making up events, that he spent more of his time in hotels in Tel Aviv than where he was supposed to be on the ground in the 4 distribution centers, not 3. He's out of the territory, so he doesn't know the situation on the ground, but there are 4 centers up and running. And I think that it is tremendously dishonest to be fired from a place, begging to stay on, begging to have a new contract, then being told that you are not wanted because you are substandard, you are not professional, you have had issues with your colleagues, and you are not wanted on the ground, you do not bring any benefit, you're fired, and then subsequently to go on this little media campaign that you have gone now in order to try to smear Israel. I think that is very dishonest. I think you are full of it. I question your personal and professional integrity. I question why, if this was the case, did you not only say how proud you are to work for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation as you were working, but why did you try to be reinstated and renegotiate a new contract? Why, if you claim that you saw things that weren't all right on the ground, did you not document or report anything in real time during the little time that you spent there, not in Tel Aviv hotels? And why are we only hearing it from you after you've been fired and discharged from that organization with a clear message from Johnny Moore and your colleagues that you are not wanted because you are substandard, not professional, a troublemaker, and simply up to no good? So there are so many questions that really undermine.
Okay, but let him respond directly to what you've just said. So, Anthony, what would your response be to what Joonaathan Kenrick has just said?
I would like to start by saying that that I respect Mr. Kenrick. I saw him on the news during the opening days of the war, enjoying his 15 minutes of fame. My wife was a public affairs officer in the Army, and we watched him on the news, and I have respect for his profession and for his opinion, and he is entitled to his opinion. What I will say is that, first, regardless of the status of my employment or how good of an employee I was, that does not justify or take away the fact that war crimes have been committed, not only verified by me as a witness, but also others that have seen it, to include IDF soldiers that are now coming forward stating that they were ordered to shoot at civilians. The sites themselves, where they are built in active combat zones, that's not an opinion. Anybody can look at a map and see where they're built. Regardless of the opinion, that's a war crime.
Obviously, they're in combat zones, yeah. That's not a war crime. It's not a war crime. If that is where the people are, then that is where the food is supposed to go. And to your point of, success or not, up until today, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation has distributed almost 110 million meals in about 2 months period. Far more per person, per location, per distribution site than anybody before that. Hamas, UNRWA, anybody else.
Not true.
And whether you agree to it and whether, Piers, you want to acknowledge that it works, that's a different thing. But 110 million meals, packages of food, that is no small number. And that's including baby formula and all kinds of
food. That is not including baby
formula. They haven't tried to distribute medicine. No, it does include, I just spoke with Johnny, it does include that. It does not include medicine. It does not include clothes and many other things, because that wasn't the core mission of the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation. Exactly, that's not their mission. They're getting water pumped in from Israeli pipes to the areas that have been established as humanitarian zones. So I think that what you're saying
but Joonaathan, let me ask you a question.
Highly questionable.
Joonaathan, let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Okay, Joonaathan, let me ask you. We know that 1,200 or more people have now been killed as they are in these lines of what looks like desperately hungry people, desperately scrabbling for the small amounts of food that are available. Who is killing those people?
So, Piers, we don't know. You can say and repeat the numbers, and you can claim that that is true. We don't know. And we can go back to our two-year conversation that you and I have been having about international media, and I'll preempt what you're going to say. Yes, I would want to have international media here. I would want to have the IDF provide more access so that reality on the ground could be better visible. Having said that, I'll say that the only source of information that you're relying on is Hamas numbers, and they have an inherent interest to try to delegitimize what the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is doing, because the GHF is a threat to Hamas and their control over the population, and the GHF
so are you saying these people haven't been
UN
killed?
Hamas cartel.
Okay, but Joonaathan, either they haven't. Well, hang on. Look, there are three scenarios, right? Either 1,200 people have been killed. Secondly, who has killed them?
No.
Right? The belief is the IDF has been responsible for most of those deaths. So either your position is they haven't been killed, or your position is they have been killed, but they've been killed largely by Hamas, or you accept that it's the IDF that's been killing them, which, given the vagueness of all their responses to all these incidents, I would say is highly more likely. Now, what is your position?
My position is as follows. One, I do not trust the figures distributed by a terror organization that murders, rapes, lies, and does psychological warfare by showing images and videos of Israeli hostages. And frankly, I don't think you should either. I think that they are professional liars and that they should not be trusted.
Whose numbers do we believe?
When they say 1,200...
Whose numbers do we believe, though, Jonathan?
Definitely
where do we get?
It
seems to me that Israel seems to know exactly. Yeah, but Israel seems to know exactly how many combatants, as you would call it, terrorists, I would call them, Hamas. You know exactly how many Hamas you're killing, but nobody on the Israel side can ever tell me how many civilians you're killing. Okay, fine. I don't disagree. I think Hamas should be destroyed. Fine, but what I want to know is where do we get? See, here's my issue.
Let me
as you know, historically,
because
Jonathan, hang on. Let me finish my point. I will. But let me
you like the second part of the answer. You like the second part of it.
No, I don't. No.
You will like it.
Fine. But before October the 7th, the casualty numbers that were put forward by the Gaza Health Ministry were generally later, and I believe you would confirm this, generally accepted by Israel after its own investigations to be broadly accurate. So it's only since October the 7th that Israel has now relentlessly said you cannot believe any of these casualty numbers from the same health ministry. To which I say, well, obviously, we know a huge number of people have been killed. No one disputes that. Where do we get the accurate information? The numbers that I quoted about people dying in these lines, that's from the UN Human Rights Agency, for example. It's not from the Gaza Health Ministry figures. So are they all lying? And if they are, and we can't let journalists in to establish independently, where do we get this information?
I see, and I agree with your point, Piers. And I think that what Israel is at fault doing is not communicating well enough and not managing the media realm of warfare in a sufficient way. And I think that is regrettable, because I think that on the ground, albeit it's taken Israel far too long, but on the ground, Hamas is being defeated. With the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, there's now a different option for Palestinians to get food, and that's a threat to Hamas. And any day in the coming days, I think it's more likely that Israel will go in and actually take on Hamas and start to finish the job of what it started almost 2 years ago. In my mind, too late, should have done it a long time ago. But what Israel should have done better is to have more access to media and from the first day start counting dead terrorists and start making a significant effort. And it's very challenging in war when you're fighting in urban terrain and there's the chaos of fighting, but Israel should have made a better effort to count non-combatants that were killed as a result of the fighting. Sadly, Israel didn't. And by the way, I said this in internal meetings in the IDF a long time ago. Sadly, Israel didn't. And as such, our enemy, Hamas, has made tremendous use of it, and they have leveraged it to great political, diplomatic, and media success. And that is regrettable. But that is partially because Israel shot itself in the foot, and I would have hoped we would have done it differently, but we didn't. It's extremely difficult to count non-combatants killed in war. And I think that I know you've had conversations with American officers and British officers. I think they will tell you the same thing. It takes a lot of time to understand who is killed in battle. And it's not one source, and definitely not a source like Hamas. But going back just to finish on the humanitarian situation in the south. If Israel provides food in a location that it has operational control over, that is not a war crime. That is exactly what you're supposed to be doing, to get civilians out of harm's way, locate them in an area where you can provide water and food and medicine and everything basic that they need, and then to provide them with those basic necessities. Now, for Mr. Aguilar to say that that is a war crime, that's absolute nonsense. I mean, how else are you supposed to provide them food? The Egyptians won't open the gate, they won't let them in, and therefore that's the place where it's supposed to be. So even to label that as a war crime shows you how absurd and how unfounded and how unprofessional Mr. Aguilar's opinion is of the situation.
Okay, Anthony Aguilar, a final word to you.
Yes, the The protocols of the Geneva Convention clearly stipulate that even during a war in an area that is classified as a war zone, as Gaza is, to establish distribution points, and you said water, medicine, and food, I'd like to reemphasize that they are not providing water or medicine, and only dried food that requires water to cook. To establish distribution sites that service a civilian population, unarmed civilians, to displace them from where they live, to go to that site to be able to receive services for life in an active combat zone is a war crime. I would welcome you to read the protocols of the Geneva Convention, sir. What I would like to say about the 107 million meals, this is such a misnomer. 107 million meals in 73 days from May 26th to the 6th of August, of which I personally was involved in the operations and the distribution of 32.2 million of those meals. That's only 18 days of food.
Well done.
The Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is short 55 days of food over the last 73 days. And that's only 3 sites. One was under construction, and number 4 was closed for the first 2 weeks because I was there. The GHF average is 18 trucks a day into Gaza. The UN was averaging 500 a day at 400 sites. So even if the rhetoric of 95% of the UN aid is taken by Hamas, which has been discredited by not only Israeli organizations, but by the United Nations and the United States, that is not true. But let's just say that were true. 5% of getting in what the UN had is still 28% more than what the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation is achieving. And they're not providing any water.
Okay, look, we've got to leave it there. What I would say, just in conclusion, and I don't want a response to this, Jonathan, it's just my observation. Because I always think you're quite honest about a lot of things that Israel's got wrong, and it makes you unusual, actually, in my pro-Israeli guests. And that's why I like having you on, because I think you do accept that certain things are unacceptable. But in relation to the issue of whether the Palestinians are hungry, you know, you can talk about however many millions of meals you're putting in there, but it remains the case that on a daily basis, the world sees crowd scenes of thousands of people absolutely desperate for small amounts of food. And in my experience, people only do that when they are very hungry. And so the hunger of the Palestinian people, to me, is indisputable. And people can split hairs about whether it constitutes a famine or starvation, whatever you want to call it. But what you can't split hairs about is that for 3 months of the blockade earlier this year, there was hardly any food going in. And I don't think there's enough going in now, or you wouldn't see these hordes of people looking obviously ravenously hungry. But anyway, that's just my observation. I appreciate you coming back, Jonathan. Good to talk to you, Anthony, and I appreciate the tone that we had the conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.